The quality is determined by the clinicians themselves. They're the ones who say, these data elements are correct. They're correct and safe to use in our health records. They represent the data that we need to collect for our patients, for patient care, for sharing with other clinicians, for reporting to government and so on. So it's primarily the domain experts themselves who are saying that the clinical data elements are correct. And what we're aiming to do with this process is, in fact, through the reviews, to get consensus that people actually recommend that this archetype is ready to be published or not. And they make comments about the things that they see that are wrong or incorrect or misrepresented and so on. And it's an iterative process until we actually get to the point where we achieve consensus. And I was myself a little bit sceptical that we could actually get consensus. But we are actually getting to the point where we can bring people together. Because it's inclusive, we don't have to decide which are the prioritised data elements. We can include everybody's data elements they need for their use cases. But the core ones, we can get to the point where we do get consensus. Sometimes we might make them simpler or remove some data elements that are a little bit contentious until we identify clearer requirements. And then we add them to the published archetypes afterwards as backwardly compatible revisions. So the data that's being captured using the existing ones still work, but we can also then start to enhance them. So there are ways to manage published archetypes and still let them grow and iterate over time. So there's a whole lot of rules and things around that from the governance point of view, but that seems to come together to ensure that a lot of people are happy. And if people find that there are flaws or problems, then they're able through the CCAM process to put their hand up and flag it and say, I think there's a major problem. And the editors are not controlling things because they can't hide that kind of stuff. They do have to respond, and they're able to then participate and get consensus again. We haven't actually had that happen, which is interesting. I expect it will happen at some stage, but it's been very much a collaborative community at the moment.
We've actually had some people saying that we need to bring in all sorts of researchers who do research on things like symptoms to be able to make models of how to represent symptoms for clinicians, and also we have to read all the literature on symptoms to be able to make these models. And we're trying to push back on this because what we're trying to do is represent what the clinicians need, and it's the clinicians' job to bring the research into their practice. If we based all our models on the research, we might not be able to represent what the clinicians need.
And clinical medicine is a bit messy.
Yes.
So sometimes the archetypes might appear messy, but they actually do represent what the clinicians do, and that's our key priority. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's attention to the academics, but that's our answer. The clinicians, what the clinicians do wins every time.
Yes. And of course research can influence clinical work, and then it will get into the archetypes.
Yes.
I just had one little thing about this with not using unpublished archetypes, just to make sure that people understand what happens. What you get then is what you have today, so it's not worse than today. So today we all have unpublished things in our systems. So this is not a new problem or something that start using archetypes and we have this new problem of unpublished stuff. It's just status quo. And another thing to know for technicians here is that you can still read something that has used an unofficial, unpublished thing. A human can still read it in the HR system. You can even transfer it from one system to another system. The thing that won't work is your automated clinical decision support won't know where to find that little measurement value, or you'll have to do more work. You'll have to look for it in the unstandardized and in another place for the standardized. So it's not a terrible thing happening, but it's just smarter not having to redo the work, just so you get the unpublished thing is not the worst thing that can happen. But it's better to do it.
You need to have your eyes open to what the consequences of using a published versus an unpublished archetype is, that's all.
It's a bit more expensive when you're going to use it.
Yeah. So I've only got a few slides here that I wanted to give some sense of what's happening in the international space and perhaps in some other national programs, but I just wanted to emphasise that what Silje's just described really is way ahead of what I've been doing, because what she's done is she's had a couple of people who've been resourced to start to manage all of this and start to manage the collaboration. The open airspace up until now has been working purely from a volunteer situation. So I've been around for a while but really had no resources. It's what I do after hours, you know, between 8 o'clock at midnight, trying to have meetings from Australia to Europe and so on. So, you know, it's been very fragmented and quite slow. The other thing is we don't have the ability to recruit clinicians in the same way that a national program does. We don't have the ability to be able to sort of dictate we need this and these priorities and that now and so on. So what Silje's team has done is actually, you know, bleeding edge kind of clinical governance, and it's really worth taking note. What it also does is it proves that this open air approach is not just a group of sort of people who are collaborating on the web and it's fairly sort of happy-go-lucky, if you like. There is a rigour that's being applied here that we can look at as a national model for other countries as well, and I think it's something that's very exciting. It also means that the group of us who sort of started originally in a fairly fragmented way, it's not just us that you're depending on. There are groups now who are being modestly resourced who are able to actually make a difference in a very fast time frame. So Silje's group, I think, will be leapfrogging the work that we're doing very quickly, and it shows that it's something that can be taken on by national programs and they can actually make it happen for real. It's not just limited to a few people and it's not something that's not transferable. We're now doing training together, so I come and do the training quite frequently. In the last few years I've been and had a number of lovely visits to Norway, but now we're delivering the training partly in Australian and partly in Norwegian. So the train-the-trainer notion is also starting to take off, and Silje's team are now going to be poised to potentially seed further and to share this kind of knowledge. So I find this very exciting and very encouraging. It's still early days effectively, but we are seeing it's something that's gathering momentum and really working. Now the international CKM is the first one that we've had. You can see we've got 1,378 users who are registered as of yesterday. We've got 419 of them who've actually actively put their hand up to be a reviewer. And over 200 people who volunteer to translate. So we have volunteers who are just taking archetypes and turning them into all sorts of different languages and then saying, please use this. And I'm the rate limiting step. There's 2 or 3 of us who can manage as administrators this, and I'm doing it in my part-time, you know, non-day job kind of role. We're the rate limiting step at the moment, and we have a fantastic problem because we have this number of people wanting to participate from 85 countries. All right, what a wonderful problem we've got. It's very exciting. And we've got 43 people who've registered from Sweden at the moment. And you can see Australia's got a lot. We've got quite a few people from Brazil and, funnily enough, the US. I think purely because of population size. They're the ones that are showing up as dark green. That's where most of the registrations are coming from. But 1,300 plus people from 85 countries is my constituency, if you like, of people to actually start to call into this work. This is just, I mean, there's some reports in CKM as well, just to give you some sense about the number of archetypes. So we've got 585 archetypes in various states. We have them in projects, which are actual governed folders, if you like, of people who are actively working on things. We have incubators, which are like a sandpit where people can start to collaborate. So very raw, immature archetypes can start to grow and have people starting to collaborate internationally on getting archetypes to the point where we can put them into the governed space in formal projects. You can see that we've had 7 that were modified in the last week. There were 34 in the last month, and we've had 263. So you can get some sense of activity over the last year there. Actually created in the last week, there's 2 new ones. There's 8 in the last month and 134 new ones. So it's giving you some sense of what's been going on from a time point of view, especially given that there's actually no one particularly paid to do this work. So it's quite still impressive. The state of each of those archetypes, we've got most of them still in an unpublished state, but we've got 43 that are published. So that's this component here. And then various ones, the initial and the draft are these blue ones. So initial are the ones that are in the incubators. These are the ones that are in the projects. We've currently got 40 in team review. Some of them have been sitting there in a kind of limbo for a little while because we haven't had the editors to be able to keep running the reviews. But again, you get a sense of activity, and I'd have to say that 12 months ago we probably had about 6 or 7 published. We've actually had a huge number that have come through just in the last 12 months. So it's because of this thing called an archetype sprint, and I put it in inverted commas because we'd hoped it would be done in a shorter time frame. I'd call it more an endurance test, possibly. But we selected 72 archetypes that we called core. So these ones that we've talked about over time are the ones that are going to be used across all of the different contexts. It started in October. Our intent was to publish as many as possible so that they can get implemented by all of these vendors. This is funded, although I'd have to say that I probably spend about 10 times as much time as I estimated when I said this is how much time it'll take. And this is the current status at the moment. So in fact, during that sprint, we've published 28 of those ones. We've got 15 we haven't touched, and the others are in various states of sort of flux, if you like. I'd also point out the FIRE collaboration. So this is where we're trying to get some cross-standards organisation collaboration happening, and that adverse reaction archetype, which is probably going to be one of the hardest we ever do, because everyone has an opinion. Every national program does it slightly differently. You've got all the reporting to FDA and all the various other groups in Europe and so on. Trying to bring together the common content for that has been a phenomenal effort. These are the kinds of examples of archetypes that we've published. The ones in white, these grey ones are currently about to undergo that full review process too, and they've really taken 12 months of research and basically a whole lot of work behind the scenes in order to get this to a publishable state. So they're about to go out for the first review rounds for medications possibly this week, if we can, Silje and I can get some time to actually make it happen. And the lab tests and imaging tests, which are clearly fundamental as well, will be coming soon afterwards. So we've had 30 years of clinical information systems, right? They've usually been developed in isolation, a proprietary approach, and the vendor says, if you want interoperability, buy more of my system. Good marketing approach. Fragmentation is the result. Then we've had a focus on messaging and messaging hubs. And this has been incremental innovation. And I'd have to say, at the end of 30 years, we've had absolutely glacial progress, right? We've really achieved very little as far as interoperability. So what we need to do is look at how we coordinate things, how we manage the clinical content flexibility. We need this agile approach. We need strong governance at the right points, but innovation at others. And this is the balance we're trying to do. The clinician engagement we've talked about, getting bang for buck in these resource priorities, learning from past experience, and this volunteer resources is the tricky thing for us to manage and to leverage. If we had modest resources, we would in fact be able to make this accelerate so much quicker. So it's really quite surprising what we've been able to achieve with this volunteer community. I'm very proud of them all, really. This is something that's came out of the Semantic Health Report. This notion of interoperability is about the human factors. Don't underestimate it. It is not primarily a technical solution. We could get interoperability with technical solutions we have here to a huge degree more than we do if we could get everybody talking. So traditionally we've had people gathered in rooms, they all fall asleep, they fight. That's what we're trying to change. And what we're trying to achieve are these archetypes. This is the kind of diagram I use to show a cohesive set of archetypes that fit together nicely, minimal gaps, minimal overlaps. They're good, strong designs for archetypes that will fit with a core national program. I'll leave the rest of those things because I think we'll talk about this further at another time too. This CKM tool has been core to helping that kind of thing happen. And just the last one, there are 7 CKMs, just for interest's sake. It is an Ocean product. It's something that I've been involved in building just for a declaration of self-interest, I guess. We have the international one, was the first one. Australia has one, our National E-Health Program, NETA, has it, although they don't quite know what to do with it, if I'm actually honest. They're still working out a strategy of how to leverage this process. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Norway, Slovenia has one. There's a grassroots group in the UK who are working on the GP to GP project and some Scottish medication models that are taking off. Brazil is starting to dip its toe in the water. They have a CKM and again trying to leverage national programs to actually get the politics to work. And the NHS Standards Organisation has also got one where they're building their own archetypes. Unfortunately, in glorious isolation to some of the work that like the international and the Norwegian groups are doing, but they have the same kind of process of clinician engagement and so on. So politics also gets in the way with some of this. So I'll leave that be.